If you've ever driven through the back roads of Appalachia, you know this. The dark out here doesn't just fall, it settles. The stories people whisper? They're not just tales, they're warnings carried down. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It always gives me chills thinking about all of us, in different places, staring into the same shadows together. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It helps more people stumble into these woods, even if they might regret it. Let's begin. My name is Margaret Maggie Delaney, and at 28 I wasn't looking for adventure. I was looking for escape. I had been working as a geologist's assistant in Pittsburgh, logging endless data points in a gray cubicle and pretending the migraines were just seasonal allergies. The truth was I couldn't breathe in that office anymore. When my contract supervisor mentioned an open field assignment, 6 weeks in the southern Appalachians, I said yes before he even finished explaining. It sounded simple: catalog soil shifts on reclaimed mining land, photograph collapsed shafts, and mark any hazardous structures still standing. They'd provide a small trailer, a generator, and a satellite phone for emergencies. Solo assignment, good pay. Just me, the hills, and silence. I told myself I'd come back renewed. Instead, I came back hollow. They dropped me in a forgotten patch of southern West Virginia, near a sliver of land locals called Devil's Fork. No towns for miles. The gravel road to the trailer looked more like a scar than infrastructure. When the transport truck pulled away, the silence was so complete it rang in my ears. The trailer was clean enough: thin walls, stocked pantry, an old propane stove. A heavy two-way radio sat on the counter beside a logbook. The ranger who'd driven me and gave a parting warning I thought was just backwoods talk. Stay clear of the holler at night. Lights move through there, and they ain't ours. I smiled politely. City people don't argue with locals about folklore. The first few days were routine. I walked the stripped hills, boots crunching through shale, snapping photos of subsidence pits and slag heaps. The woods were mostly quiet, not peaceful quiet, more like the hush of a church after everyone has left. At night I cooked canned soup, read by lantern light, and told myself this was exactly what I needed. No traffic, no deadlines, no migraine-inducing fluorescence. On the fourth day, I took a descent trail I hadn't logged yet, a narrow gulch slick with moss, shaded even at noon. At the bottom, hidden behind chokeberry thickets, I found a shack. It shouldn't have been there. The mining maps showed nothing built on that parcel. The roof sagged, the walls bowed. But inside, it looked staged. Bones. Clean, pale, arranged deliberately. Jawbones lined up along the sill. Vertebrae strung like beads across rafters. A child's ribcage nailed flat to the wall like some grotesque artwork. And in the center, balanced on a rusted tin pail, was a skull facing the door, as if waiting for me. I snapped a few photos with trembling hands and backed out. That night, I dreamed the skull turned to follow me. It was near midnight when I woke, not to an animal rustling, but to footsteps. Slow, heavy, circling the trailer. I lay stiff in my cot, barely breathing, the walls thin enough that I could hear gravel compress under each step. Then tap. One single knock against the back wall. Silence followed, so sharp it made my teeth ache. I sat clutching a hammer until the sun came up. When I checked outside, there were no prints. No marks. Just empty gravel. I called it in on the satellite phone. My supervisor, Ray, chuckled and said, "You just met the porch deer. They nose around at night. Don't panic." Deer didn't knock. But I didn't argue. 3 nights later, it escalated. I was half asleep when I heard talking outside. Faint. Broken. Like a recording warped by static. I froze, listening. The words were mine. North slope marker, instability near root cluster. It was my own voice, slurred, as if something was trying to wear my speech like a mask. I grabbed the flashlight, flung the door open. Nothing. Just the black trees pressing close. The next morning the truck outside was smeared with handprints. Small ones like children. Others stretched unnaturally long, fingers clawed, dragging faint scratches down the panels. I washed them off, but the marks reappeared in my mind every time I closed my eyes. From then on, the woods themselves seemed complicit. Tree trunks bore carvings, spirals gouged so deep sap bled down like tears, stick figures with 6 arms, circles marked with vertical slashes. One oak had something tied to its bark. Teeth. Human teeth strung on twine. Kip, sorry, no Kip here, my dog wasn't with me. I was alone. I remember gripping my hammer harder than my camera, as though nails and claws might leap from the bark itself. That night the trailer shook with soft tapping. Then the sound of breathing, wet and rattling, pressed right against the thin aluminum walls. I tried to avoid the shack's gulch entirely, cutting wider circles in my survey. But Devil's Fork has a way of steering you wrong. One evening, as I tried to follow the logging road back, the forest around me flickered with lights. Lanterns, dim, yellow, swaying between the trees. At first I thought surveyors, or maybe hunters. But the movements were wrong, too slow, too synchronized. The lights floated, bobbing without footsteps. When I raised my camera to zoom, the lanterns winked out, and then the laughter came. Short, choked, like someone trying to laugh with a crushed throat. I ran until my lungs burned, not caring which direction led back. I saw them 2 nights later, shapes in the tree line as the sun fell. 3, low to the ground, bent at the spine. They moved like puppets with strings tangled, twitching too quick in one limb and too slow in another. One rose halfway upright. Its face caught the last slant of light. The skin was gray, eyes filmed white, mouth stretched into a too-wide grin lined with yellow stubs. I bolted, crashing through brush, heart pounding. When I slammed the trailer door behind me, I realized I'd left my survey logbook outside. I never went back for it. The final night began with the usual tapping. But this time it didn't stop. The walls shook. The trailer groaned with weight pressing down from the roof. Fingers scraped metal. Something slammed against the side window until the glass spiderwebbed and burst inward. I screamed that I had a gun. I didn't. Silence fell. For a moment I thought they'd gone. Then, from the far corner near my audio recorder, I heard a voice. My voice. Please. I just want to go home. I lost it. I kicked the chair from under the door, unlatched the chain, and ran barefoot into the trees. Branches tore my legs, thorns shredded my skin. I ran blind until the black turned gray with dawn. I staggered onto the county road like a madwoman, bloodied and gasping. A coal truck braked hard, horn bellowing. The driver didn't ask questions, just pulled me into the cab. Behind us, in the receding woods, I swear I saw a flicker of lantern light. Back in town, still shaking, I told a sheriff's deputy what had happened. He just looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You went up Devil's Fork, didn't you? Should have listened." He told me what his grandfather used to say. They're the lantern watchers. Spirits of miners buried in the slag heaps. Folks say they borrow voices and faces, trying to remember themselves. But if they catch you watching, they'll take your shape instead. The agency scrubbed my assignment, said equipment malfunction had corrupted my files. I never saw the photos again. I never collected the rest of my pay. I moved back to the city. Therapy helps sometimes. Most nights I sleep. But every now and then, when the power cuts out and my apartment goes still, I hear it again. A soft knock, and then my own voice, begging to be let inside. My name is Elliot Crane. I'm 41, and until a few years back I was a freelance photojournalist. That sounds glamorous, but really it meant chasing deadlines, staring at screens until sunrise, and trying to sell stories to magazines that kept downsizing. Somewhere in the middle of all that I lost my marriage, most of my friends, and the last strands of my health. When the chest pain started, my doctor told me what I already knew. Burnout was killing me slowly. I had a choice, keep digging my grave with work or step away. For the first time in 20 years, I stepped away. That's how I ended up in the Appalachians with nothing but a backpack, a tent, and the thought that maybe silence could heal what cities had broken. I wasn't following a real trail. I'd been wandering from site to site, staying near official campgrounds. Then one night, scrolling through a dead forum for old backpackers, I saw a cryptic post. Raven Valley isn't on the maps. Don't go. People that walk and don't always walk back. That should have been a warning. Instead, I treated it like an invitation. The attached photo showed a limestone bluff smothered in moss, a creek vanishing into a cleft between ridges. There was something magnetic about it. 2 days later, I drove out past Cherrystone, Virginia, and found the access road, just dirt and roots, with a crooked fence post that looked like it hadn't held a sign in decades. As I parked, a man came out of a weather-beaten ranger cabin nearby. He was in his 60s, beard like tangled rope, shoulders thick as a stump. "That cut of woods isn't for visitors," he told me flatly. "No blazes, no signal. You step in, you're on your own." I told him that's what I wanted. He stared a long moment, eyes steady, then turned without a word and walked back inside. The path was narrow, overgrown, the kind of place that swallows sound. Even the birds seemed to avoid it. My dog Kip, a shepherd mix who hated being indoors, trailed behind me with his ears pinned flat. By late afternoon, I found a patch of ground beside a stream and slung up my tarp. The first night passed quietly enough, though the forest had that heavy, expectant silence, like being in a room where everyone holds their breath. The second day was uneventful. I dozed, read from a battered book I'd dragged along, and let Kip splash in the creek. I thought maybe the warnings had just been internet campfire tales. On the third night, that changed. It was just after 2 a.m. when Kip bolted upright. Not barking, not whining, just frozen ears up, body locked. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not an animal's shuffle. Not scurrying claws. Human. Slow. Deliberate. One crunch at a time in the leaf litter, circling. I stayed motionless. My lungs felt like glass, ready to shatter if I breathed too hard. The steps went around the tarp once. Then again. Then they stopped. No wind. No night birds. Just the hard silence of waiting. Kip pressed against me, trembling, his tail jammed tight between his legs. I didn't move until daylight. When I finally crawled out, the ground nearly buckled under me. Prints. Bare feet, but wide, warped. Toes long, splayed, bent like fingers gripping dirt. Some had claw-like drag marks behind them, as if whoever made them had crawled part way. They circled us twice, then vanished into the trees. That day, I tried to rationalize. A hermit, maybe. Some mountain squatter. Appalachia has plenty of stories about those. But by the next night, I stopped believing my own excuses. The steps came again, only this time there was breathing. A ragged, wheezing draw, as though air was forcing its way through a torn throat. Then a hand pressed against the nylon. 5 fingers. Too long. Too thin. The pressure dragged slowly downward until the whole tarp quivered. I snapped the lantern on. The light cut through nylon, but nothing cast a shadow. Outside, the forest stood still. Too still. That night I didn't close my eyes once. By morning I'd had enough. I broke camp fast, Kip glued to my side. But the further I hiked, the stranger the forest seemed. Trees bore carvings, spirals gouged deep into bark. Crude stick figures with 4, 5, 6 limbs. Bones tied with cord hung from branches. Small ones, probably birds, but one figure carried a necklace of teeth. Human. Root stubs still attached. Kip whined low in his throat, pacing as though he expected something to lurch out of the tree line. I decided to head back the way I'd come, but after hours of walking, nothing looked right. The creek that should have been beside me had vanished. Landmarks I'd passed were gone. It was as if the forest had shifted while I slept. By dusk I knew I was lost. I didn't bother pitching the tent. I threw up a tarp, built the largest fire I dared, and sat with my flashlight in one hand and a folding knife in the other. That's when the clicking started. Not insects, not woodpeckers. Rhythmic, mechanical, like 2 stones tapped together in an endless pattern. Then came whispers. Not words, just syllables, guttural, slow, as though someone who had only heard of language was trying to imitate it without understanding. Shapes moved beyond the firelight, fast, crawling low to the ground, limbs jointed wrong, skin pale and smeared with mud. Once, in the beam of my flashlight, I caught the glint of teeth. Rows of them, too many for a human mouth. Then something hurled a rock. It struck the fire pit, scattering sparks across my legs. Kip lunged at the dark, snarling so hard his body shook. I whipped the light toward the trees and saw them, eyes. Too high up, space too wide. Dozens of them, watching. I didn't sleep. At first light, I ran. I didn't care which direction, only away. My pack tore against branches, my coat ripped, my compass snapped clean from its strap. By noon, lungs burning, I stumbled across a shallow cave set into a limestone cliff. A bad idea, maybe, but I needed cover. The smell hit before the dark did. Rot, meat, mold. Inside, bones piled high. Animal skulls, antlers, but also a small sneaker torn at the toe. A backpack with the strap cut. A boot with something still inside it. My stomach lurched. I turned to bolt. That's when I saw them. 7, maybe 8 of them. They crawled along the walls, the ceiling, bodies bent at angles no joints should allow. Their skin was ashen, smeared with black marks that looked burned into flesh. Their mouths gaped too wide, lined with rows of tiny, uniform teeth like those of fish. One sniffed the air and smiled. Another dropped from the ceiling, landing in a crouch, head cocked, clicking in rapid bursts. Kip barked so fiercely I thought his throat would tear. He lunged, snapping, buying me seconds. I used them. I ran. I don't remember much of that flight except for branches whipping my face, lungs tearing, heart screaming. Behind me came the snapping of wood and the wet thud of crawling things. But somehow, by some miracle, I broke through into a fire road before sunset. I collapsed there, barely conscious. Hours later, a hunter found me and drove me back to the ranger station. The same bearded man was waiting. He didn't ask what I'd seen. Didn't have to. He pulled out a hand-drawn map and tapped a blank section of ridges. Locals call that Raven Valley, he said. The ash-marked live there. They take what strays too deep. You're lucky you walked out at all. I asked what they were. He only shook his head. They were never meant to speak, but they try. That's why they sound the way they do. Search parties went back for days. They found my tarp, my ripped pack. They found the cave, the bones, the teeth. But nothing else. No tracks. No prints. No Kip. I went back to city life eventually. Tried to bury it under work, therapy, and nights of pretending sleep would come. Most nights I manage. But sometimes, when I'm lying awake at 2 a.m., I hear it again. That slow clicking, followed by the hush of breath that doesn't quite belong in a human throat. And I wonder if the ash-marked ever stopped following me, or if I just carried them back with me. I'm Daniel Mercer, 43 years old, and before all this happened, I wasn't the type of man who frightened easily. I'd spent 2 decades in construction safety inspection, which means I've seen scaffolding collapse under screaming workers, dug through rubble for crushed bodies, and stood by families as we waited to see who would make it out alive. You learn to tuck your emotions away in that line of work, to face the worst with a clipboard in one hand and a grim sort of calm in the other. But none of that training prepared me for the night I crossed into Spruce Lick Hollow, where the ridges swallow the sky and the old families still whisper about what lives between the trees. It started after a month of endless accidents on site, 3 deaths in 2 weeks, each one gnawing at me as though I should have seen it coming. By the time the 3rd funeral wrapped, I felt hollow myself. So I did what I sometimes do when the weight won't ease, packed up a small kit, grabbed a rifle, and went into the mountains to clear my head. I'd been told about Spruce Lick years ago by an older inspector. He mentioned it in passing, that cut of woods east of Black Hollow, land nobody claims. No trail maps listed it, and the locals didn't speak of it unless liquor loosened their tongues. He said if I ever needed silence, real silence, that was the place. So I went. By Saturday afternoon I'd turned my truck off the county road and rattled down a forgotten access lane that ended in nothing but pines bending low. No signs, no markers, just gravel that bled into dirt and then into moss. I shouldered my pack and started in. The path wasn't really a path anymore, just the ghost of wagon ruts swallowed by undergrowth. The deeper I went, the tighter the trees pressed, until the world dimmed even in daylight. Finally, the land fell away into a shallow basin between two ridges. That's where I made camp, on a flat stretch of ground against an old rock outcropping. No boot prints, no deer sign, just carpeted leaves and the restless hum of cicadas. It was exactly what I thought I wanted. By nightfall the fire crackled low, my tent was up, and I was half asleep under the illusion of peace. I woke around 2 in the morning, not to any sharp noise at first, but to that jolt of awareness, the kind where your brain seems to scream before your ears know why. Then I heard it, a dragging sound, slow, heavy, like something wet being pulled across dry leaves. I held still. Moments later came the footsteps, bare, soft, the faint thud of flesh against earth. They circled the tent once, then again. My hand found the knife by my sleeping pad. I didn't unzip the flap. Didn't dare. The sound stopped. For the rest of the night I crouched awake, frozen, listening to my pulse pound against my ribs. At dawn I forced myself out. What I found made bow rise in my throat. Footprints. Not boots. Not hooves. Human-shaped, but wrong. The toes were too long, curling into the earth like fingers. The heels spread flat and wide, pressed deep as though whoever left them weighed twice as much as a man should. They circled the tent twice, then vanished toward the tree line. I shoved my gear into my pack without eating. The hollow felt claustrophobic, as if the trees leaned closer now. I decided to climb the ridge northward and cut back toward the road from higher ground. For the first mile, nothing but the wheeze of my breath and the dry rasp of leaves underfoot. But the quiet wasn't right. Even in the backwoods, there's always sound. Insects, crows, a squirrel scolding. Here there was nothing. My own breathing felt too loud, out of place. Then it came. A laugh. High-pitched, like a child. But wrong. Too clipped, as though someone had recorded a giggle and played it back at the wrong speed. It came from somewhere to my right, no more than 30 feet away. I froze, eyes combing the underbrush. Nothing moved. Then she stepped out. She looked about 12, barefoot, hair tangled with briars. Her skin carried the gray pallor of stone. Her mouth hung slightly open, but her eyes weren't eyes at all. They were black holes, empty of any glimmer. She tilted her head, studying me. Behind her came a boy no older than 10, his head hidden beneath the broken skull of a deer, antlers jagged like shattered branches. His chest heaved, though he made no sound. And then another figure emerged, a man tall, shoulders smeared in ash. His jaw slack, lips torn raw from chewing them. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. That dragging sound returned. Leaves scraping. Something heavy pulled across earth. The fourth one appeared, massive shoulders, arms like logs, dragging the limp body of a fox. Its skull was crushed, one eye bulging grotesquely. The thing dropped it with a wet thump. My throat closed. I took one step back. They didn't move. They only watched. Another step, still their gazes held me. Then I ran. Branches lashed my arms as I tore through the underbrush. For the first few seconds I heard nothing behind me but my own ragged gasps. Then came the slap of bare feet on leaves. Fast. Too fast. And that laugh again. Closer. Louder. Splintering the silence. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned, legs screaming as I clawed uphill. At last the slope dipped. Through the trees I glimpsed the shimmer of gravel, the road. My heart stuttered with hope. I stumbled, fell, ripped my palms raw, but kept moving. When my truck came into view, it felt unreal, like a mirage conjured by terror. I fumbled the keys, dropped them, snatched them up with shaking hands, and wrenched the door open. Just as I slammed it shut, I saw her again. The girl, standing in the trees. Not chasing, not smiling, just watching. I drove blind, tires spitting gravel, until the county road stretched wide beneath me. In town, I parked at a diner and sat in the cab for nearly an hour before my hands steadied enough to turn the handle. Inside, the chatter of waitresses, the clang of plates, the hum of an old jukebox. It felt like life rushing back into me. But I couldn't eat. I just sat, staring at the neon clock above the counter, trying to believe I was safe. I told no one for weeks. Finally, one night over whiskey, I told my friend Harlan, a lifelong local. I left out details, only said I'd seen something east of Spruce Lick. He went quiet. Then he said, "You went too deep. Old ground out there. My grandfather used to warn about the hollow ones. Said they're what's left when a body dies wrong, when the spirit gets trapped under the mountain and wears itself into something else. They don't eat. They don't sleep. They just wait for folks who wander too far." He wouldn't say more, just shook his head. I never went back to Spruce Lick. I still camp, still hike, but only where laughter and radios and human noise are near. And yet sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and I'm alone too long, I swear I hear it again. That laugh. Short. High. Cut off halfway through. I'll check the windows, the locks, the yard. Nothing there. But I know the truth now. Once you've been seen by the hollow ones, you don't forget. And I don't think they do either. My name's Rachel, and before last winter I worked as a traveling nurse. I'd been moving from contract to contract since the hospital in Charleston laid off half their staff. At first, I thought temporary gigs would give me freedom, no office politics, no roots tying me down. But the truth is, after a while, you start to feel like a stranger in your own skin, drifting from one borrowed room to the next. That's how I ended up in Pine Hollow, West Virginia, tucked deep in the Monongahela forest. The agency called it a quick hospice assignment. They always say that, as if dying is something you can pencil neatly into a calendar. The patient was an old coal foreman named Ezekiel Harlan, bedridden after a stroke. His daughter said he had weeks left, maybe less. The pay was decent, and honestly, I needed a break from the clamor of Huntington and Charleston. A few weeks in the quiet hills didn't sound so bad. I was wrong about that. The Harlan place was perched on a ridge road that didn't even show up right on GPS. You had to pass 2 rusted gates and a cemetery older than the Civil War before the gravel drive even appeared. The house itself looked beaten by a century of storms. 2 stories tall, porch sagging like an old jaw, the siding stripped to gray bones. Clara Harlan, Ezekiel's daughter, opened the door when I knocked. She couldn't have been more than mid-30s, but the deep hollows under her eyes made her look older. Behind her, her husband Jonas hauled in my suitcase. He didn't speak, just nodded once before disappearing into the kitchen. Inside, the air smelled like wood smoke soaked into wallpaper. Ezekiel lay in a hospital bed set up in the parlor, tubes snaking into his nose. His skin was the color of candle wax, his eyes filmed but awake. When they locked on me, I felt a shiver crawl over my scalp. He wasn't looking at me, more like through me, as though something behind me had caught his attention. "This is Miss Rachel," Clara told him softly, brushing his hair from his forehead. "She'll be helping us a while." He didn't reply, just stared past us all, lips parted slightly. I'd seen plenty of patients do that before, but something about the way he stared, unblinking, focused, made me want to check behind my shoulder. The work itself wasn't difficult. I gave Ezekiel his meds, turned him to prevent sores, kept him clean. Most days he barely spoke, only drifting into half-conscious murmurs. But sometimes the things he muttered weren't like the usual fevered nonsense I was used to. One dawn, I was jotting his vitals when his hand shot out and gripped my wrist. His skin felt papery, but his strength startled me. His lips cracked apart, and he said clearly, "They're standing in the tree line again." I froze, waiting for more. He released me, eyes still locked on the window. Outside, the pines swayed gently. Nothing else. "What do you mean?" I asked. But he said nothing more, slipping back into silence. A few days later, while adjusting his oxygen, I heard him whisper, "Mud on their feet. Don't let him come inside." The way he said it, steady, sure, like someone giving instructions, knotted my stomach. One evening I covered a late shift so Clara and Jonas could go into town. Alone in that sagging house, I kept the lamps low and read by the glow of the TV. The old man slept, chest rattling faintly. That's when I heard it. A whistle, low and deliberate. Just 2 notes, rising, falling. At first I thought it was some night bird, but then it came again, clearer, closer. Not a tune exactly, just a sound, as if someone were testing out human breath without quite understanding it. I rose, went to the porch, and peered into the darkness. The ridge stretched quiet and empty. When I closed the door, Ezekiel's eyes were open. "Don't answer him," he whispered. "Don't let the whistler in." I wanted to ask who, but something in his face, that flicker of fear and recognition, made me swallow the words. Later that night, when Clara returned, I mentioned the whistle, trying to laugh it off. Her face paled. She set down her purse with trembling hands. "My grandfather used to talk about that," she said finally. "He called it the Whistler of Pine Hollow. Folks said he wasn't human. Not anymore. A spirit or something worse. Said he waits by the dying, calling out in voices he's stolen. If you answer back or open the door, he can come inside." Jonas, sitting at the table, didn't look up from unlacing his boots. He just muttered, "Don't talk about him after dark." I laughed nervously, but no one else did. About a week later, Clara and Jonas had to drive out of town for a funeral. That left me for the overnight shift. The minute they left, the house felt different. The silence pressed in. I brewed coffee and sat in the parlor beside Ezekiel's bed. His breathing rasped steadily. At 2:53 a.m., I heard it, crunch of gravel outside. Slow, deliberate steps. Not hurried, not sneaky, just steady, as if whoever it was had all the time in the world. Then came the taps. 3 soft raps against the front window. I froze. My heart beat, so hard it felt like my ribs might crack. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to confirm what I already knew. But against every instinct, my eyes slid toward the glass. A tall figure pressed close. Too tall. Its shoulders hunched, its head tilted unnaturally, like a puppet on crooked strings. I couldn't see a face, only the shape of it, pale and indistinct, as if the night itself were trying to sketch a person. Then it spoke. My own mother's voice. "Rachel, open the door, honey. I'm cold." But the words came wrong, clipped, distorted, like a recording played through broken speakers. Behind me, Ezekiel groaned. His eyes rolled, and with sudden clarity he rasped, "Don't let him wear you." I snatched the fireplace poker and stood in the hallway trembling. The figure didn't knock again. After a long moment, it turned and walked away. Not fading into the woods, no. It moved straight down the gravel path, shoulders rigid, every step in perfect rhythm. I sat awake till dawn, every lamp burning. Ezekiel never spoke again after that night. Not a word. 2 weeks later, he slipped away in his sleep, quiet as a candle guttering out. The funeral was small. I lingered afterward, heart pounding with one last question. "Clara," I asked, "do you think it was real? The whistler?" She didn't answer right away. She only looked at the ridge behind her father's grave, the black pines swaying in the wind. Finally she said, "If you heard him, then it was real enough." I left Pine Hollow the next day and swore never to take another assignment in the mountains. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, when the city outside my window falls still, I hear it again. A low whistle, 2 notes rising and falling, and I pray to God I never hear a knock at my window afterward. My name is Caleb Ryder, and I wasn't supposed to stay in Ashen Fork longer than a season. I was 34 then, teaching art part-time at a community college downstate. When my uncle passed, he left me his trailer and a few acres carved into the Blue Ridge foothills, not far from a road that wound itself in and out of nowhere. I thought it'd be a retreat, cheap rent, quiet woods, time to sketch and work on the series I'd been struggling to finish. Ashen Fork was the sort of place you missed unless you broke down nearby. A 2-pump gas station, a shuttered feed store, and a single tavern that opened 3 nights a week. The people waved but didn't linger. The land itself carried the weight of silence, dense trees pressing shoulder to shoulder, as if the forest wanted to swallow the town whole. The trailer squatted at the edge of a hollow locals just called the Fork, a dip between ridges where sound behaved strangely. Whispers carried. Steps echoed the wrong way. The old women at the tavern muttered that the Fork kept secrets. I didn't ask questions. I was there for cheap living and quiet, nothing else. At least, that's what I told myself. It was October, the air thin and crisp, the kind that makes every leaf look sharper in the afternoon light. I'd been hiking half a mile from the trailer with my sketchbook, searching for textures, rotting logs, stone ridges, tangled roots. I'd found a fox skull weeks earlier, and thought I'd capture it in the soft light near an oak bent almost into a question mark. The woods were alive with bird chatter, the faint hiss of wind dragging through branches. Then it all stopped. Not a slow dimming, just a click, as though someone muted the world. My ears rang in the quiet. That's when I heard it. A whistle. Off-key, stumbling through 5 uneven notes. Not a song, not quite a pattern, more like someone fumbling with memory. I froze, sketchbook against my chest. The sound came from deeper in the fork, where the trees knotted tighter and the ground dipped into shadow. Then came my name. Not shouted, not spoken, whistled. C.A. Drawn out, almost playful. Something in the tone curdled my stomach. Too smooth, too deliberate, like a child imitating an adult. I ran. I didn't think, didn't pack up. The sketchbook hit the leaves, pages fluttering like startled birds. I bolted uphill, branches scratching my arms, lungs burning until the trailer appeared through the trees. Uncle's old truck sat rusting in the yard. My neighbor, Hank, was leaned over its hood. When I stammered out what I'd heard, he didn't look at me. Just spat tobacco juice into the dirt and muttered, "Fork's got a whistler. Always has. Don't follow it and don't answer back." He tightened a bolt like that was the end of it. A week later, the town changed. A boy named Eli Mercer, 12 years old, vanished walking home from the bus stop. Folks combed the woods, dogs sniffing the creek beds, men hollering until their throats cracked. They found scraps of his hoodie snagged in bramble, and prints in the mud. Not adult, not child, something between. The search stretched days, then weeks. Nothing. Eli was just gone. That night, the whistle came again. Faint at first, like a memory I wanted to forget. Outside my window, circling the trailer, I lay in bed rigid, sweat slicking my back, telling myself it was the wind. Then I saw it, thin fingers pressing against the screen of my bedroom window. Pale, too long, nails dark with earth. They tapped once, twice, as the whistle slurred my name. I didn't sleep after that. I went to the tavern, desperate for explanation. The regulars gave me looks that weighed more than words. Finally, a woman named Marlene leaned across the sticky bar and whispered. Long time back, before there was an ashen fork, trappers spoke of a thing that lived in the holler. Said it was neither man nor beast. It learned by listening. Heard your voice, it'd try to wear it. Heard your step, it'd walk it back at you. Some say it was born from a child lost in those woods, stretched wrong by hunger and time. Others swear it's older than the Cherokee, older than the mountains themselves. Whatever it is, it whistles to draw you in. And if you answer, she didn't finish. She just touched the cross at her throat and poured herself another whiskey. Winter bled into March. I'd taken to sleeping on the couch, half convinced staying near the front door would keep it from pressing against my window. One night, around 2 a.m., I woke to the smell first. Damp earth, copper, sharp as blood. Through the glass, I saw it crouched at the treeline. It wasn't standing, wasn't crawling, squatting low, its long arms dragging fingertips through the dirt. Skin the color of wet ash, mottled with mud. No clothes, just grime and flesh. Its head tilted, jaw slack, eyes wide as if it had never blinked in its life. Then it smiled. Not joyful, not human. A puppet's imitation of something it had seen, but never understood. The whistle came, jagged and broken, before it rose in one jerking motion, its spine bending backward too far, as though it couldn't remember how bones were supposed to work. I screamed. The trailer door banged open and Hank staggered out, rifle in hand, hollering into the dark. But by the time his boots hit the dirt, the thing was gone. Just trees, shivering in the cold wind. By sunrise, I was packed. I didn't wait for explanations. Didn't care what Hank or Marlene or anyone else said. I locked the trailer, left the keys on the counter, and drove until the ridges shrank in the rearview mirror. I told myself I'd never look back, but Ashen Fork had already worked itself into me. Even in the city, with sirens drowning the night and concrete swallowing the horizon, I hear it sometimes. Faint, barely there. An off-key stumble of notes slipping between traffic noise. And worse, every now and then from the corner of my eye, I'll see a reflection in the glass. A face slack and grinning, lips moving though no sound comes. I never whistle, but I think it's only a matter of time before I slip, before instinct betrays me, and I answer. And when that happens, I don't think anyone will find me either. My name is Elena Rourke, and I was 25 the summer they sent me away. Officially, the hospital called it compassionate leave. In plain words, I'd broken. Too many 16-hour shifts, too many bleeding bodies on stretchers, too many nights with no sleep. The moment I froze during a code blue, unable to push a single chest compression, the chief resident suggested, firmly, that I get out of the city and rest. I had nowhere to go. My mother suggested I stay with her brother in the Cumberland Plateau, just past a scattering of ridges called Harlow Gap. Your Uncle Elias lives quiet, she told me. No television, no noise, just woods. Might help your head. I didn't argue. The drive wound tighter with every mile. Asphalt gave way to cracked gravel, then to a dirt track carved through endless trees. The air grew denser, heavier, until cell service blinked out entirely. My GPS surrendered a few miles before I reached the cabin. Uncle Elias's place wasn't welcoming. It slouched in a clearing no larger than a backyard, the boards warped with age, patched with tin and bark where storms had torn at it. 3 enormous bolts sealed the front door, gleaming newer than anything else on the property. Elias met me at the steps. He was lean, skin weathered into leather, beard streaked gray. He didn't hug me, just nodded once, eyes scanning the treeline behind me as though he'd expected something else to arrive in my shadow. Inside was worse. No clock, no radio, no phone. Shelves sagged with old field journals and jars of dried roots. A potbelly stove glowed in the corner. What struck me most was the lack of locks inside. Bedroom, bathroom, closets, all bare handles. Only the front door was armored, triple barred. That first night, Elias slid each bolt with a ritualistic slowness. I half joked, expecting a break-in. Not a joke, he muttered. When the moon thins, they come bolder. I laughed. He didn't. The days bled together. Elias gave me chores, splitting wood, fetching water from the hand-pumped well, patching the roof. We rarely spoke beyond short commands. When I wasn't working, I read his journals. They weren't medical notes or hunting records. They were warnings. Beside a drawing of mushrooms, if it hums, cover your ears. Under a sketched deer track, don't follow when the prints double back. On a page showing a crude trap, too slow for the stone ears. The phrase repeated through multiple notebooks, stone ears. I asked him once what it meant. He ignored me. By the 4th night, I realized something unnatural. Summer woods are supposed to be loud, cicadas whining, owls calling, frogs chirping at dusk. But Harlow Gap's forests seemed to breathe differently. At sundown, every sound cut out. It wasn't silence so much as erasure, as though something had scraped noise clean from the air. One evening, standing on the porch, I felt it again, that crawling sensation of being watched. The leaves didn't move. The air didn't stir. Yet the hair on my arms rose. Then came the crunch. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, grinding dried leaves just past the tree line. I swept my flashlight. Nothing. Only when I killed the beam did the sound resume. I told Elias the next morning. He didn't even glance up from sharpening his knife. Stay inside after dark, he said. If you hear them call your name, you don't answer. If you see them crouched, you don't look twice. 2 nights later, brushing my teeth at the cracked porcelain sink, I saw her. Through the window, 10 yards into the trees, a girl crouched low with her palms flat against the earth. She was listening, not with her ears, but with her skin pressed to the soil. Her hair hung matted with leaves, her back hunched like a stray dog. Her eyes caught the reflection of my light, Not whites, not irises, just black pools that glimmered like wet stones. When I snapped the flashlight on, she didn't startle. She grinned. The teeth were crooked and sharp, too many for her small mouth. Then, with a motion both animal and wrong, she scuttled backwards into the dark, her limbs bending at disjointed angles, palms dragging like claws. I dropped the flashlight. By the time I retrieved it, the clearing was empty. I told him what I saw. For the first time, Elias truly looked at me. They were here long before cabins, he said. Long before towns. Settlers used to say some children never came back from the woods. Not because they died, because they changed. The forest taught them how to listen differently. Through stone, through roots. They learned to echo the voices they heard. Those are the stone ears. I asked if they were ghosts. They bleed, he answered. But they don't move like us. And if you answer when they call. He stopped there. By the second week, they tested the clearing. I woke to the sound of tapping. Gentle, polite. One by one along the trailer's windows. 7 taps. I counted. Then came the voice. Elena, honey, it's me. Open the door. It was my mother's voice. Exact. The warmth, the tiny catch before she said, honey. But my stomach twisted. She was 300 miles away. I stood before the door anyway, hand half raised. Elias gripped my wrist so hard it bruised. Don't, he whispered. They can't break in. But if you give them a crack, even a word, they'll have you. We sat awake till dawn. Only when sunlight broke did the birds dare sing again. Days later, restless, I dug deeper into his journals. In one, I found a photograph pressed between pages. A black and white print, edges curled with age. Children in front of a weathered cabin. Among them, Elias, no older than 10. All smiling except one. A girl crouched at the corner, hands buried in dirt, staring straight at the camera. Her grin was too wide. Her eyes were nothing but dark stone. On the back, in a heavy hand, when the woods remember your name, don't answer. I tried to leave the next morning. Packed my duffel, hiked toward the gravel track. But the forest bent wrong. The path doubled back without my noticing. An hour's walk returned me to the clearing, though I'd sworn I'd gone straight. Elias waited on the porch. The gap doesn't let go easy, he said. The night before my mother returned for me, the stone ears came closest. No tapping this time. No voice. Just silence so heavy I felt it in my teeth. I peeked through the curtain. At the edge of the clearing, 5 figures stood. 2 tall, limbs bent backward at the joints like broken deer. Their skin sagged as though it were slipping off their bones. And each pressed their palms to the ground, listening. One raised its head, slowly, and though its mouth never moved, I heard my own voice whisper from the trees. Please let me in. I don't remember screaming. Only Elias slamming the final bolt. When my mother arrived, I said nothing. Not about the girl. Not about the voice. She didn't ask why Elias stood pale and silent on the porch, arms crossed tight. As we drove, he pressed an envelope into my hands. Open later. I opened it an hour down the interstate. Inside was another photograph. Newer. Color. Me. Standing at the window, brushing my teeth. In the background, crouched in the trees, the same girl. Grinning. I live back in the city. No woods. No silence. Sirens drown out the nights. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I feel the vibration in my teeth again, that thick silence pressing bone deep. And last week, walking home from the hospital, I heard it. Not footsteps, not tapping. A voice, high and sing-song, carried faintly through the hum of traffic. Elena. I didn't turn. I don't think it matters, because if the woods remember your name, they don't forget. I am Dr. Claire Givens, 33 years old, archivist for the State Folklore Institute. My specialty was Appalachian oral traditions, the half-forgotten tales whispered in kitchens, at campfires, or scratched into margins of church records. Ghost stories, hunting myths, warnings about the woods. My colleagues treated it as charming anthropology. To me, it was fieldwork. I had grown up in Lexington, Kentucky, far from the hollers and ravines where such stories were born. But in the fall of 2015, I was assigned to collect accounts in a pocket of the Cumberland Escarpment near the Kentucky-Tennessee border. The place was called Redwater Ravine, though you won't find it on many maps. Locals said the soil bled red after rain, iron-rich and metallic. It stained shoes, tools, hands. And for generations there were whispers of the hollow-eyed. The drive narrowed the farther I went. Gravel broke into ruts into dirt barely wide enough for my rental car. Cell service disappeared an hour outside of town. The last farmhouse I passed had its windows boarded. The house I'd arranged to stay in belonged to the McCreadys, an elderly couple who rarely left their property. Their cabin leaned into the ravine wall, roof patched with tin. No television. A single bulb flickered above the porch. Mrs. McCready greeted me with a kerosene lantern. Her first words weren't hello. They were, "Lock the door after dark, and if you hear your name, don't answer." I laughed politely, as though she were leaning into local color. She didn't laugh back. My first recorded interview was supposed to be with a farmer 2 ridges over. He never showed. Instead, his daughter came riding a mule bareback, pale-faced, clutching a leash without a dog. She told me through tears that their hound, Belle, had gone missing. Not run off, not attacked, taken. She swore they'd heard her yelping, then screaming. She used the word like it was human. I should have left it alone. But curiosity is the poison of archivists. That evening, I followed her directions and hiked up the slope behind their farmstead. The woods should have been alive with insect noise. Instead, silence clung to the branches like frost. My boots sank into iron-red mud. That's when I found it. Belle's collar. It hadn't been torn off. It was nailed into a beech tree, the brass buckle shining new. 3 deep grooves were carved beneath it. Not straight like a knife, but jagged animal, gouged as if with stone or bone. I tried to record my field notes there, but the mic picked up only static. Even when I spoke, my voice came back warped, bent, delayed. I told myself it was interference from the ravine walls. But as I hiked back, I realized the static was not random. Beneath the crackle, faint and distorted, something repeated. Claire. Drawn out. Off key. I snapped the recorder off and shoved it in my pack. That night I pressed the McCreadys gently for more. They exchanged glances, then Mr. McCready rasped, the hollow-eyed. Always been here. Folks say they went underground generations back, traded eyes for ears so they could hear the earth breathe. The stone taught him. Now they crawl back up when the moon thins. His wife added, they don't just hear. They borrow. Voices, footsteps, prayers. If they know your name, they'll keep it. Wear it. I asked if anyone had seen them. She leaned closer. You'll know 'em by how they smile. Teeth first, like they practiced in the dark. 3 days in, I hiked deeper into the ravine, chasing half-rotted fence lines and creek beds. Dusk crept faster than I expected, bleeding the woods into gray. I was kneeling to photograph an old carved symbol on a sycamore when the air pressed suddenly flat. No insects, no wind, no bird calls. Then a shape bent low across the creek. At first I thought it was a deer, injured, awkward. But as it rose, the light caught its face. The sockets were sunken hollows, the lids shriveled, but its ears stretched wide, cartilage ridged and torn like leaves. Its lips peeled back in a grin too sharp, teeth filed or broken into points. It swayed as if listening. Then it spoke, not with its mouth, but with my own voice, perfectly echoed. Help me. I stumbled back, slipped in the red mud. That's when another dropped from the trees, landing in a crouch on hands too long, nails sunk with dirt. It tilted its head, listening to something under the soil. I bolted. I ran until my lungs burned, until I crashed through brush into a collapsing shack at the base of a ridge. I slammed the warped door shut and dropped against the wall. The smell hit me first. Rot thick with copper. Inside, bones hung from rafters on twine. Skulls lined the shelves, some animal, some not. Carvings scarred the beams. An eye scratched out, ears widened. Then the tapping began. Soft at first, then circling the shack. Bare fingertips against the wood. Whispers trickled through cracks in the wall. Not English, not any language I knew. rhythmic, sing-song, weaving under my skin. One pressed its face to the shattered window. Skin stretched thin, gums black with soil, tongue twitching against the glass. It didn't blink. I must have blacked out. Morning light poured through the holes in the roof. The shack was empty. My recorder was still in my pocket, but when I played it back, the night was gone. Only silence. I followed the creek downstream until I found the road. A ranger spotted me and drove me back. He didn't ask questions. I didn't offer answers. Back at the institute, I logged the experience as unusable, claiming corrupted equipment and uncooperative locals. I should have closed the file, but late one night, cataloging tapes, I made the mistake of replaying the Redwater recordings. At first, static, then beneath it, my own voice. Not notes, not recollections. Pleading. Claire let me in. The worst part, I never said that. Not once. It has been years. I avoid fieldwork. I stay in the city. I tell myself the hollow-eyed belong to the ravine. But 2 weeks ago, walking home past midnight, I heard a sound that froze my veins. Not words, not static, just the delicate, patient tapping of fingers on glass. And I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was behind me. I wasn't 17 when it happened. I was 22, just back from my first year of college in Louisville. I'd come home burned out, half ready to drop out, and desperate for a summer that would make me feel like I hadn't wasted 4 years of high school on nothing. That summer, in my hometown of Ardell, Kentucky, boredom was a disease. A handful of us clung together like we were still kids. Not because we liked each other all that much, but because there was nothing else to do. Most of us worked part-time jobs, or none at all. We spent long nights in parking lots, sitting on car hoods, and pretending to have the kind of fun you only see in old movies. The group that night was familiar: Maggie, Ryan, Cody, Leah, Hunter, Caleb, and me. 7 of us, restless and hungry for something to shatter the monotony. We had soda in the cooler, a Bluetooth speaker playing the same playlist we'd heard 100 times, and a pile of gas station snacks sweating in the humid June air. What changed everything was Maggie. She was always the one pushing boundaries. That night she leaned against her Civic, tossed her empty can into the grass, and said, "You all ever hear of Cold Iron Hollow?" I'd heard the name before. Most of us had. Cold Iron was a gulch cut deep into the northern edge of the Cumberland Plateau, about 40 minutes from town. Officially, it was state forest land, but no one hiked there anymore. Maggie grinned when she saw us react. My cousin swears it's where the Watchers live. Says if you go past the rusted gate at night, you'll hear them giggle before you see them. Ryan rolled his eyes. Please, every town's got one of those stories. But the rest of us were hooked. That's all it takes. One dare, one story, and a bunch of restless 20-somethings aching to prove we weren't scared. By 11:30 we'd split into 2 cars and started driving. The farther we went, the less the road resembled a road. Asphalt peeled away into gravel. Gravel collapsed into ruts filled with old rain. The forest pressed in thick on either side, branches clawing at the vehicles. We passed a gate that sagged on rusted hinges. It should have been locked, but the chain was snapped. Beyond it was no real road at all, just a pair of dirt grooves half swallowed by weeds. We parked in what had once been a clearing, though trees had begun to reclaim it. An old deer blind collapsed at the treeline. A fence post leaned sideways, split from rot. The air smelled metallic, heavy with damp earth. "This is it," Maggie said. "Trail starts here." Her voice was lighter than her body language. Her hands shook when she turned off her flashlight. We stepped over the post and into the woods. There was no true trail, just a path where weeds didn't grow. The canopy swallowed our light. Branches tangled overhead, letting almost no moonlight through. The deeper we walked, the quieter it grew. At first I thought it was normal, bugs settling down, maybe an owl keeping silent. But by the 10th minute, I realized it wasn't just quiet. It was void. No crickets, no frogs, no leaves stirring in the wind. The only sound was our sneakers grinding leaves and the occasional nervous throat clearing. After maybe half an hour, the woods opened, not into a meadow, Into a settlement. Cabins leaned at odd angles, roofs sagging into themselves. Walls covered in ivy, windows busted into gaping mouths. Rusted iron bed frames jutted from the grass like bones. One mattress lay collapsed in mold, the fabric bubbled black. A clothesline sagged between two trees, no fabric on it, yet it swayed faintly as if something unseen had brushed past. And there, at the far end of the hollow, carved into the hillside, was an opening. Not a root cellar, not a mine. Something between. Its wooden door had half rotted away, revealing a mouth of black stone beyond. No one spoke. Of course we split up. Fear makes people stupid. Maggie and Leah wandered toward the cabins on the left. Cody and Hunter drifted toward the collapsed root cellar, drawn like moths to the black hole in the earth. Ryan hung back near the fence post, muttering that the whole thing was dumb. I stuck close to Caleb. He was the only one who looked more nervous than me, and I figured if something startled us, at least we'd both run the same way. The cabin we peeked into smelled wrong, sharp like copper, with an undertone of damp fur. The walls were covered in handprints. Small, large, overlapping. Not painted, not carved. Worn into the wood itself, like countless palms had pressed again and again in the same places. Ritual, Caleb whispered. His voice cracked. I backed out fast. That's when I heard it. Not a branch snapping. Not footsteps. Something low, dragging, crawling across leaves. I whipped my flashlight toward the treeline. Nothing. Then motion. A figure darting low, too fast for a person, too big for an animal. From the other side of the settlement, Ryan screamed. Something's out here. Maggie and Leah bolted back into view. Brandon, no, not Brandon, Cody, had blood running down his forehead. Something threw a rock at me, he panted. Before we could react, a sound rippled through the clearing. A giggle. Not human. Wet, broken, like someone laughing through waterlogged lungs. The air shifted with the sound. A stench washed over us. Rot, scorched hair, spoiled meat. My stomach lurched. Caleb gagged beside me. Then more giggles. To our left. Our right. Surrounding. Shapes flickered in the black. Limbs too long. Torsos bent at crooked angles. Faces pale and slack. Eyes wide and reflective, but not catching light the way animal eyes should. They didn't move like they were chasing. They moved like they were circling. Watching. We ran. No words. Just instinct. Branches whipped our faces. Roots grabbed ankles. We tore through the undergrowth, stumbling, clawing forward. Beside us, always just out of sight, something kept pace. And through it all, giggling. Thin, jagged, overlapping, like children mimicking a joke they didn't understand. When the clearing where we'd parked came into view, relief nearly buckled my knees. We tumbled into cars, slamming doors, locking them. My chest burned with every gasp. That's when Caleb whispered, "Don't move." Behind the car, feet. Bare. Mud-caked. Then a face lowered into the window. Eyes too wide, teeth too many. The skin of its cheeks twitched like it hadn't learned how to wear a smile. Then it vanished from view. I didn't wait. I reversed so fast gravel sprayed into the woods. We didn't stop until headlights of a gas station burned through the night like a lifeline. We didn't talk much after that. Cody got stitches for his head. Leah refused to mention the night at all. Maggie dropped out of community college that fall, saying she needed to get out of Kentucky altogether. Me? I left for grad school the following year. People asked why I'd abandoned home. I always said it was for education. But the truth is simpler. I didn't feel safe there anymore. Years later, in a library in Tennessee, I found a reference to Cold Iron Hollow in an 1890s church ledger. It spoke of a settlement that sank into wickedness, whose children learned not to pray but to listen. They became the watchers. Their laughter was not of joy, the record read, but of mockery, for they had forgotten what true mirth sounded like. I've tried to look for Cold Iron Hollow on maps. Nothing. Satellite images blur or skip that portion of forest, like the pixels themselves refuse to remember. But sometimes, when I'm walking home late at night, past alleys where shadows hang too deep, I'll hear it. Not footsteps, not voices, just that broken, bubbling giggle. And when I do, I walk faster. because if the Watchers found us once, they can find us again. I was 41 the year I decided to vanish. I'd spent nearly 2 decades teaching high school history in Lexington, the kind of job that grinds you down year by year without ever quite breaking you, until it does. My breaking point wasn't one thing. A string of complaints from parents, whispers about favoritism, a fight that broke out in my classroom while I just froze at my desk. My reputation, already thin, collapsed overnight. I packed up what little I had, resigned before the district could push me out, and left the city without telling anyone where I was going. The cabin I found wasn't much more than a lean-to with walls, hidden deep along a forgotten cut of road near Backbone Ridge, Virginia, where the Blue Ridge Mountains knot themselves into an endless maze of hollows and creeks. It had no electricity, no plumbing. The windows were patched with foggy plastic. The floors slanted so much a marble would roll from corner to corner. It smelled of wet ash and rodent droppings. I told myself it was perfect. There was one store in town, 30 minutes down switchback roads, with a single rusted pump out front and shelves stocked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. The man who ran it was called Rufus, though everyone whispered he hadn't been born with that name. He looked carved from wood, angular, leathery, always in the same faded jacket. The first few visits, he said little more than, "That it?" when I stacked jerky, matches, and canned beans on the counter. But gradually, he started slipping in comments. "Don't leave food out. Don't hike after dark. If you hear voices, don't open your door." He said it flat, like a grocery clerk telling you to bag eggs separate from milk. I thought it was just small-town superstition. Mountain warnings passed off like weather reports. I laughed it off. He didn't. The first few weeks passed quietly. I split wood, fetched water from a rain barrel, even started reading again. My body adjusted to silence. My thoughts slowed. For the first time in years, I slept through the night, until the tapping began. At first it was light, a knock or two against the wall, always around midnight. I blamed branches, the wind, or animals, but the pattern didn't change. 3 taps. A pause. 3 taps again, from different walls, circling the cabin. One night, the rhythm shifted. 3 taps, then 4, then silence, as if something were moving around the walls, keeping pace with my heartbeat. I began keeping the old shotgun beside my cot. A few days later, I woke to find a rabbit laid neatly on my porch. Eyes missing. Limbs crossed over its chest like a corpse prepared for burial. No blood. No struggle. Just placed. The next week it was a raccoon, arranged the same way. When I asked Rufus at the store, he stared at me for a long while, then sipped from his battered thermos. "You burn it?" "No. I buried them." He nodded. "Good. Don't burn what they leave you. Makes them meaner." That was the first time I realized he wasn't joking. A week later, hiking behind the cabin in early morning fog, I found something that froze me. A tree trunk carved with a mouth, not drawn, but chiseled, deep and ragged. The lips stretched too wide, the teeth etched as sharp slashes. Inside the gouge, the bark was charred black. Below it lay bones, bird skulls, deer femurs, and something smaller, tied together with twine. I turned back immediately. That night, the tapping returned. Only this time it came with a low hum, vibrating the walls like the thrum of power lines buried under the floorboards. It was foggy again when I saw one. I was on the ridge path, mist curling through the trees, when I spotted it half hidden behind a poplar. At first I thought it was a naked man, pale and hunched. But the arms were too long, the hair hanging in wet ropes down its chest. It tilted its head, not curiously, mechanically. I called out stupidly, "You okay?" It ducked behind the tree. When I reached the spot, it was gone. No footprints, no sound of retreat, just silence, and that low humming in my ears like an electric fence. I pressed Rufus harder after that. "What the hell's in those woods?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Ash mouths." The word dropped heavy, as though he hadn't spoken it aloud in years. He told me they were once people, coal families trapped when the mines closed. They burned fires underground, sealed in with smoke and poison until they weren't human anymore. Their lungs turned to chimneys, he said. Their eyes went first, melted from the smoke. So they learned to listen instead, to hum to one another through the ground. If they take a liking to you, they'll leave you gifts. But you don't refuse and you don't burn. Bury what they give, and maybe they'll pass you by. And if I don't, then you're marked. After that, I stayed inside after dark. But staying inside didn't stop them. One night, scraping fingers dragged across the plastic-covered windows for 10 straight minutes. Not frantic. Slow. Testing. Another night, I heard footsteps on the roof. Heavy. Measured. Then the scrape of something sharp dragged across shingles in a circle. I sat on the floor with the shotgun and prayed for dawn. The next morning, I found a bundle of sticks tied with sinew hanging from my doorframe like an offering. I should have buried it, but fear curdled into anger. I tossed it in the stove and watched it burn. They came in numbers that night. At first shadows in the trees, then shapes stepping into the clearing. Pale bodies thin as smoke, streaked with soot, ash clinging to their skin. Some crawled on all fours, others limped. Their mouths stretched open, teeth blackened. They didn't speak. They didn't moan. They hummed, low and deep, a chorus that made the walls tremble. One wore the skull of a deer lashed to its head. Another dragged a human ribcage bound in wire. They circled the cabin until every wall echoed with tapping. One clambered onto the roof, its weight creaking above me. I stayed frozen, shotgun in my hands, as the night stretched endless. Just before dawn, they melted back into the trees. By sunrise, I'd packed everything. I shoved clothes, notebooks, and the shotgun into the back of the truck. I didn't care if the road tore out the undercarriage. I was leaving. I drove until I hit traffic lights, until I saw people walking dogs and kids on bikes. Civilization. I didn't go back. Months later, settled in a rented apartment in Roanoke, I thought I was free. Until a package arrived. No return address. Inside was my old field recorder I'd left behind in the cabin. When I played it, the tape was full. Not of my voice, not of my notes. Of humming. Low. Endless. And beneath it, faint but clear, a voice that turned my blood to ice. It was mine, calling from outside the cabin. Let me in.